Hi, everybody. Welcome to Web3 Unpacked. I'm Matt Sky, here with our co-host, Rich Pasqua.
Welcome, everyone.
And today we have a really interesting guest. We have award-winning journalist, author, futurist, Paul Barron. He's host of the Paul Barron Network, and he's covering crypto, blockchain, AI, robotics, I think just about every major transformational technology of the future. It's super exciting to have him on the program. Paul, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, Paul, I think let's just jump right into it. If you can maybe tell us a little, for those not familiar, tell us about the Paul Barron Network. Tell us about your history in this space, and
Sure.
What got you into covering these technologies.
Well, we've been in tech for quite some time. Most of it has been centered around the Web2, revolution that occurred over the past couple of decades. My background was birthed out of tech, so I worked with Microsoft very early. Worked with them as a developer lead and helped bring a lot of the Windows platforms, the OS systems, to market, mostly in Asia, and then spent a lot of time building technology systems for Fortune 500, and then eventually fell into the media business. Started a few media outlets, started and sold them, and then launched my own media company about a decade ago, primarily around data science that we were building that was harvesting at that time mostly social listening tools to gauge sentiment data on major retail sectors. And then we eventually fell into gauging sentiment around the crypto sector, and that was around 2016, 17, and then launched the secondary during COVID. Kind of spun our media business into two verticals because we have other media verticals outside of tech, and really just got focused on tech, and obviously crypto percolated to the top. Web3, and my background, it was an easy pickup for me to really kind of jump into that space. That was kind of how we got started.
It's definitely a fast-moving space and very exciting. It's definitely not boring, that's for sure.
Oh, jeez, for sure.
Yeah, I know. It's every day there's something new, something a new company kind of joining the world of Web3. Very, very exciting. Paul, real quick question, because we go through this a lot ourselves. How much do you think right now, because you've been doing this for a while, and you're very, you're focused in on the economics, even some of the politics of this world. How much do you think is, pointed topics versus education? Education, like broad education for people trying to get into this, and even if they are into it, how much education do you have to do on a regular basis?
Well, okay, so there's two areas that we see just from our own audience. Our audience is now around 2 million listeners a month, both on the podcast and the video version side of it. So we get a lot of feedback. We also have a private member group called the Diamond Circle that's approaching 80,000 members. So the amount of feedback we're getting around this is what we would like is mostly centered around early stage education. And what we've kind of discovered through just polls and really looking at some of the test models that we use for content development is right now it reminds me a lot of the early stage of the internet, where people kind of get it but don't really understand the inner workings of it. So they're trying to essentially take that next step. Whether it's an individual investor who's just trying to understand it so they don't make mistakes on, betting on the wrong company, or if it's an enterprise who's maybe looking at a strategic, plan for a roadmap that they're trying to integrate either Web3 or some sort of crypto element into it. If you look at, just the Polygon Starbucks example, those are way up the food chain in terms of big companies that are really starting to try to implement. But even they, I think, to a certain extent, I talked to a lot of the teams at Starbucks and many of the big Fortune 500s, and I just point blank ask them, do you guys have a Web3 team? Are you actively developing in this area? Most, I would say 90% or more in many cases, are either just getting started or they literally are taking a Web2 product manager or dev lead and trying to convert them to Web3 and letting them learn literally as they fly the plane. So it's very, very early for sure.
That's the theme of this industry. Everyone's kind of learning as we fly.
Yeah.
Paul, just curious, when you talk to these different companies, what are their biggest pain points? Like where is either the confusion or what are the challenges right now that large enterprises face when they go into Web3?
Yeah, it's the same story. Fortunately, at my age, I'm in my early 50s, and the amount of technology innovation that I've had a chance to see, very lucky because I was in on the early stage when I was a young developer with Microsoft. I was in the era in which people kind of looked at the internet as kind of a fad. So I kind of was in those boardrooms when that was being laughed at. I was also in the boardrooms of major brands when they looked at social media and also said, this is a fad, it's going to go away. I think that's exactly the same thing that they're looking at with Web3. The problem is if it's any gray hair in the boardroom, they're usually the ones that are sitting there very silent, very stoic, and looking at this as, listen, we've seen this, play before. We're not going to get caught with our pants down here. So they're starting to play a lot more strategically. The problem is right now is there's just not enough resources for them to make good decisions. And that's the challenge, because right now it's either VC oriented, which have obviously have a stake in the game, or it's Web3 developers that have either moved over to it and are coming in from a Web2 stack that don't fully understand what's happening in Web3, and they too are learning. So very inexperienced, scenarios that I think are playing out in the Fortune 500 space right now. What I think it's going to simply mean is we're going to see a lot of mistakes early on, just like we did in Web 1 and even in Web 2. But their biggest pain point right now is trying to figure out, how do we even staff this, and how do we put this on the roadmap, and then how do we allocate budgets to it, which is another area that they're trying to fight with right now.
Yeah, fascinating, because we talk to recruiters and everyone else in between, and one of the themes that we've brought up, Paul, in the past is failing in public, basically. Mm-hmm. That idea of, we are moving fast with limited resources, and mistakes will happen. We don't want them to happen, especially on the economic side of things or the tokenomic side of things. We've seen it happen, but it's an unfortunate part of what this world is. We talked about Microsoft and Apple kind of developing, and they fail every day. Mm-hmm. But they fail within their own walls, right? And now it's just open in the whole cosmos, Interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you see it constantly. I mean, you could just look at just Solana alone would be the poster child for it, And I think people are recognizing that and also trying to flex not only their strategies around this, but also kind of the framework in what they're doing from a people standpoint, because most likely the developer leads, even the biz dev leads or the project leads that are taking out the Web3 for a lot of these bigger companies, and even for some of the smaller companies that are trying to be more aggressive in the space, most likely these are short-lived positions. I don't think, it's funny. I look at the rosters of these Web3 companies. I've been in tech for 25 years. I know when I know it when I see a web dev that knows what they're doing, and I know when a project lead is got the kind of skill sets that it's going to take to leap this forward. Not saying anything bad about kids or young people that are just getting started, because in many cases their innovation ideas are way above that of some people that's got a little more gray hair in the space. But one thing I'm seeing is a very interesting shortage. We saw this before, but this time it's even more hyper realistic in the sense of the fact that the developers that we see today in some of these projects, they're taking too long. They know they're taking too long, and to try to get something off. And I think eventually these guys and people get replaced by maybe either an emerging crop right now of developers in Web3 that really start to get it. And, we create the next, superstar engineers that really are going to be the leaders in the space. But it's kind of a wild west right now. Very unusual for sure.
Yeah, it's going to take time, and you kind of have to grow your own, actually,
Yes.
to your point. We're seeing it. Like I said before, we're talking to recruiters, and there is a glut. It's not a massive problem right now, but I think as Web3 adoption just kind of skyrockets, it's going to be a real problem soon.
Yeah, and I think the Fortune 500 companies are the ones that most likely will win, providing that they have an executive team that has committed to the space. You look at a brand like Chipotle or Starbucks. I know these are two food brands, but retail is most likely going to see some pretty significant leaps in this area. Look at AMC, what they've been able to do, and I think they'll continue to be very aggressive. You look at their CEO, he's pretty much been, and I think he was kind of backed into it, obviously through the Wall Street Bets kind of debacle that occurred, but I think he was kind of backed into what was happening in pop culture. And with pop culture, it kind of led him into NFTs and obviously now into understanding what's next for AMC. But it's that I think happens in a lot of these companies that are already seeing these kind of dynamics. They have seen them for quite some time.
Yeah, and there's the technology shift, right? We can always talk 2.0 to 3.0. But when you're talking about these executives that have been around for a long time and have, raised and built massive brands and companies and organizations, they need to take the mental shift, that kind of 3.0 jump the chasm shift into really understanding why we're building these technologies, and fostering the idea of truth. Right. And then there's the idea of, these NFTs are, to your point, pop culture and things are happening and we got to get involved in it. And we commonly say it's not all about CryptoPunks and the Bored Apes. Mm-hmm. It's about utility, right? So once you understand that it's not just that fun little JPEG, that there are smart contracts that could have AI built into it. They could be used for supply chains and really sophisticated business applications. That's kind of the education that they need to kind of go beyond what's kind of just in their, right in front of them as far as NFTs go.
Oh, for sure. I think the NFT space has been very similar to the early stages of the social media space, is that it was looked at as, very pop culture driven. It didn't necessarily have a business model behind it that, most people at that time, when you think about all the way back to 2007 now and 2008, when social really kind of got its wings, there were a lot of CEOs. And again, back to just my history of working in the media business, working with companies that were developing, including our own strategies around social and what we were going to be doing in the future of streaming and podcast. I launched my first podcast in 2006, and I was, and it was interesting because, and the reason I think it's important because of the NFT discussion, when we launched our first podcast in 2006, I was part of another media company. I had merged another media company with a larger media company. They were mostly magazines and events. I had brought the online product to them, the tech component, the mobile aspect. And they pushed back on two things. They pushed back on mobile. Mobile will never be able to overtake web browsing. Wow. That was what was told to me.
I was wrong.
And then they pushed back on podcasting. And I said, listen, it's going to be very early. We're going to be super edge and we're going to bleed for a long time. But once we break out and there's a utility for this, it's going to be big. Trust me, this is going to be a media transformation. And a friend of mine his name is Adam Curry. He was one of the original, he was him and, it wasn't, I can't remember the other guy he developed. Are you
talking about Adam Curry from the old MTV days?
Yeah. So Adam Curry launched and created the RSS concept. Dave Weiner and Adam Curry. So Dave Weiner was the developer. Adam Curry came to him, and they tried to create the RSS feed, which we know as now, which is what podcast runs on. And Adam was a longtime friend that I had just found through the annals of podcasting, because he had launched it about 2 years prior to that. And and at that time, you have to remember, the podcast almost didn't exist. And Curry was the one who brought it to Steve Jobs. And Jobs actually got him in his office and said, do you mind if we create, a podcast app out of this thing? But the point I'm getting at is that if you have someone like a Steve Jobs that took a nascent technology that was just barely birthed and said, wait a minute, there's utility here. That's exactly where I see NFTs today. And it's in a space where I think you're going to see a very nascent technology. We haven't seen the breakout just yet, but there's going to be a company or a person, whether it's Elon or someone else, that mainstreams this and gets it into a utility use case that literally changes the dynamic of business forever, for sure.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it's funny you bring up Adam Curry. I have a soft spot for him. I spent many years working for MTV Networks, and of course, my generation, I grew up on MTV. So lots of love and respect for Adam Curry, for sure. He did some amazing stuff within the podcast space, as you just mentioned. So
yeah, he's pretty crazy.
Good guy. Yeah.
Paul, what do you think that big moment will look like? Because there's something kind of interesting about Web3 that's different than the .com era. I feel like you're almost seeing the hype of blockchain and crypto before we've seen the massive use case. Whereas when you look at the .com era, it's almost like the use cases were kind of obvious underground, but the hype wasn't really there. You had people saying, why do I need a website? What's the purpose? So this is almost a little bit inverted. But what do you think that'll look like? And do you have a sense of, not that we're predicting which company, but what that moment may be?
When you look at the history repeats itself, it's just so interesting to watch, whether you look at the last 25 years of history or the last 250 years of history. And I study history a lot, especially from the economic forefront and kind of the whole aspect of how societies grow. And even just going back to the social state in which we saw the transformation occur in the mid-2000s, I think it has a lot of similarities to what we will see with Web3. And the reason I say that is because of the fact that at that time, the top 100 Twitter accounts, I've been on Twitter since 2008, I think was when I actually signed up. I'll have to look at my account. But the point is that the top 100 Twitter accounts today versus what they were back then were ironically not any one media company, not any one pop star, things of that nature. So it was a very early stage. So I think the scenario here is that we are seeing a very different situation unfolding in Web3 that is unique and has not been seen before, at least in modern technology. So I think what we'll see is it's either going to be gaming or fashion. We'll be most likely breaking it out. The outside horse in the race is sports, and whether or not they're going to be able to maybe make the bridge over to it, whether it's some sort of sports integration from what like Chili's and Socios is doing with just what they're seeing around the whole soccer aspect. But I think it will be a potential opportunity in the future for sure.
Yeah, and we're and that brings us to something that we've been talking about quite a bit is the adoption, right? So who's poised to adopt quicker and really have a presence here? And I totally agree with you, Paul, in the sense that number one, gaming for sure. There's already microeconomics happening within games and platforms. That whole industry will kind of push the metaverse world forward. But I agree with you on the fashion end of it too, because we're seeing that with like Nike and Artifact right now. Mm-hmm. And that's absolutely fascinating. And I love that partnership actually happened because they're really gamifying the NFT space. They're making it engaging, and they're offering utility and entertainment along the way. Whether it be, virtual, sneakers or gear, within a virtual space, or, a custom pair of sneakers.
Yeah.
So we're starting to see that a lot. Who else do you think is poised to kind of really push forward? I mean, we got Solana's, we've got Starbucks,
Yeah, it'll be retail. Retail will be another, major move. The challenge with retail is they move a little bit more lethargically, in the sense that they're cautious to a certain extent. They don't want to hurt their brand. They don't want to make a wrong move, but at the same time, they don't want to alienate the up and coming, millennial and Gen Z audience, which they know is kind of adapting to this kind of technology. So they're kind of living in both worlds right now, a Web 2.0 world and a rising star Web 3 world. So I think retail will be one of the factors that plays into it. In terms of the companies or the projects that make the breakout, listen, I've interviewed probably 1,000 executives in the Web3 space just in the last 3 years. And because before we launched PBN, we were doing a lot of research on the backside of spinning up the network and to get it rolling, because we really kind of thought that crypto would only be a subset of the channel. And we thought AI, robotics, and EVs to a certain extent would kind of be the baseline. Now, again, I was wrong. Crypto Web3 kind of just sucked up all the air in the room, even though, now we're dealing, finally, a couple of years later, we're dealing with AI technologies. When you look at what Tesla's doing with their Tesla bot, that most likely we'll start to see some movement in that space. And that's good for, how we cover the space. But the big moves right now in Web3 are the obvious companies, the Polygon Studios, et cetera, that will most likely make the biggest moves. But I still believe, I say this on the show often, is that I'm not sure that we actually are seeing the company that's going to make the breakout that everybody thinks is coming. I'm not even sure that company's been formed yet. It's likely to be a founder or a startup lead that's either working at another company right now, or a very young, millennial or Gen Z that is literally coming up with the idea of where this is all going. And we're still maybe a decade away from really seeing that take off. I think there'll be a lot of experiments in the next decade, and there'll be some big wins and some very public failures. But I think the course is set right now. It's just a matter of how many people get on the boat.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you. Agree with you more. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't, and it could be that small fry right now that just kind of blows up and has that killer idea, and just blows everyone out of the water. And I think there are, I'll just add to that. And I think for some of the big boys out there, no names mentioned because we don't know who they will be, they're going to learn a lot. They're going to get a lot of bumps and bruises, I think, in the next 10 years. Some of them will, if they don't adopt, as we were talking about before, quick enough, or have the right resources, or push forward with the right technologies. So we may see that as well.
Yeah.
Paul, I'm curious also. Oh, go ahead.
I was just saying, I think there is there's actually an age gap right now occurring in Web3 that I've seen really show up on the founders and the team pages. And of course also with, and what I mean by that is, when I was in Silicon Valley, most every new founder during the dot-bomb era, when I was doing a lot of investing, almost every founder I talked to was under the age of 25. And today I'm seeing founders on Web3 between 35 and 55. It's a different era now. And the reason I think that's occurred is because we're seeing people who have seen this before, and they're transitioning into Web3 because they kind of know, it's the old Gretzky, they're skating to where the puck is going. So they're a little bit more savvy around it. So, and they understand the need for leadership, which I think is going to be a really interesting dynamic, because the difference between a Web3, I don't know if you guys have followed some of these early NFT creators, but some of the new NFT creators, there is a marked difference in their creative style, in their whole pop culture. I mean, you really have to extend into, in some cases, 3 generations to really understand what's happening in this space. It's a very interesting phenomenon right now.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the age thing with founders, because, yeah, the beginning internet was like kids and under 25, as you were mentioning. We work with a lot. We help people build and design and communicate within the Web3 space, and a lot of what we're hearing is it echoes your sentiment. And a lot of them, I'm like, well, don't we want to celebrate some of these guys, the developers? And like, you know what, we're fixated on the founders and the diversity of history and the depth of history that they have, either within the technology sector or even outside of the technology sector, sometimes into military experience, showing the rest of the world that, you know, there are adults steering the ship here. So it's fascinating to see how you said the Gretzky, you know, leading the puck kind of thing. It's spot on.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
But you definitely want that mix too, right? I mean, it seems like you want to have that youthful side, and especially like when we talk to some younger folks in the NFT space, there is a cultural difference. It seems like you want to make sure you're on the pulse of because these are completely new artistic styles, completely new ways of ownership. Even if you have the experience, it's a different thing. But Paul, just jumping around a little bit, I want to get your take on some recent events. There's been so much happening over the year and over the past few months, like the merge, and just curious, what are your thoughts there? What do you see happening to the industry? What's the significance of an event like that?
The Ethereum merge, I think, is probably. Yeah, listen, I've been in tech for 25 years. Yeah, and I know I ran 300 developers in Asia when we were on a very tight timeline to get something done for Microsoft, and so I understand what the kind of an understanding a little bit of the feat that was just accomplished. And I look back and I think, gosh, we were developing OSs when OSs were just really starting to break out. That was a big feat, sure. But I feel like the Ethereum merge was most likely the most technologically advanced feat we have accomplished yet. When you look at the size, feat I think has been one that has been unmatched. So what they've been able to pull off, I think, is somewhat miraculous. When you think about just the amount and at the same time, the importance that played for the crypto space, had that not happened smoothly as it did, I think it would have possibly put a black eye on crypto that may have never recovered from. So it was looked at, I think, from the industry insiders as this is either going to screw everything up, or if these guys pull this off, it's literally going to stick a flag in the ground and say this can be done. Especially when you think about just the transition of what ETH was trying to do in the Ethereum group there. I mean, Vitalik, he's kind of outlined it for quite some time. I know there's a lot of people that say they miss the mark and miss deadlines all the time, but the fact that they were able to stay on this one was pretty amazing. I was just in awe by what they were able to pull off.
Yeah, there's tremendous amounts of benefits. Obviously, speed, the price drop, or the whole bit. I completely agree. It's one of the most profound technology advancements within the space for sure. But I think maybe what are your thoughts on proof of work versus proof of stake? That to me, that topic is perhaps one of the more tenuous discussions amongst developers and the community alike.
Yeah. Proof of work is, I still believe it's probably the core value of what crypto is really designed for when you look at just what Bitcoin has been able to do as a true proof of work model. It is, and I think it is the true essence of blockchain. So when I look at that, I still believe proof of work is still the alpha. But proof of stake is interesting. But at the same time, I'm also a little bit concerned with proof of stake in the sense of decentralization versus centralization. Yeah. And I think centralization could be a factor down the road. Now, sure, it's not happening right now, but possibly in the future, it could be a bigger issue than it is today. But we're still very young on true big proof of stake networks outside of some of the obvious ones in the layer 1 area and even in the layer 2 aspect. But I think the opportunity there is really large. The challenge will be centralization. And this is the thing that I think with Ethereum, it does face as a potential. It may not be a potential in any near future, meaning the next decade, but as it starts to get more and more prominent and more investors and institutional capital, et cetera, coming in, it is a very good possibility we could start to see a little bit more centralization, which would be detrimental, I think, to Ethereum as a whole.
Couldn't agree more, and that is my number one red flag with everything here.
Yeah.
Are we going back to what we know?
Yeah, it's exactly
what we know
the old
didn't
way.
work.
It just added another layer to the same thing.
Just yet another layer to it, and there you go. The majority taking the stake of the pool. It's just back to where we are right now, and it's clearly not working. Obviously, just open up any news outlet or turn on any radio station, and it's not working. So, huge concern for us here as well.
But Vitalik is a brilliant person. He must have certain plans in place or has concerns about this too, right?
I have theories on that. Not that he's not brilliant. That there are actors in any early stage industry, and I won't go on the record here too much with my private thoughts about what's really happening here. But if in any early stage of any industry, whether you look back, and I've had, as I said, had a chance to see this a couple times, there's always a puppet master. It just happens to be the case here in crypto. I see it through. I mean, we look at on-chain analytics. Our own power index, our crypto power index, is a sentiment tool, and it's a very accurate tool with defining where markets move based on sentiment. And with social, it is one of the key fundamentals of how price action occurs in the market. So we're watching this very closely. I've spent a decade on building data science models around this. So we've broke it 100 times and then modified it to adapt to what we're seeing out there in the marketplace. So what concerns me is when I see sentiment data that doesn't correlate with price action. Then I step back and I go, we've got some there's real manipulation going on here. I didn't really in the beginning think that could be at play here, but as I said, in early markets, there's always puppet masters, and unfortunately, I feel like that we are faced with an industry right now that there are a handful of puppet masters, I think, that are pulling the strings for the entire industry. Remember, this is only $1 trillion industry, okay? We are still a baby in the size and scope of what the global industry should be. Look at the restaurant industry. That's a $4 trillion industry globally. Look at the retail industry, medical industry. And then you take the financial, industries as a whole, different markets, whether it's gold or look at the S&P and securities, real estate, et cetera. I mean, what we see right now in Web3, Bitcoin, obviously cryptocurrencies is still just a beginning. And because it's so small, it falls prey to these bad actors. Now, I'm not saying that there's bad actors in Ethereum, but I will question everything in crypto. I understand where the movements are, and I see the upside is vastly dynamic and also vastly opportunistic for the right people in the right place at the right time. It's happened in social. It's happened in early tech mobile. It's just unfortunate. It's human nature.
Yeah, great. Paul, I couldn't agree more. And, fascinating points. And for me, the Ethereum thing, the red flag for me to the idea of what I would say, maybe not bad actors, but actors or people swaying what's going on there. Yeah. They definitely, someone or a group of people had a sway over Vitalik and company there. So to me, it's okay. There are government and financial regulations happening all over the place. They're playing whack-a-mole with all the prototypes, as we know. The majority of the voices within that community, perhaps tapping or whispering in Vitalik's ear, are all in bed with government and or financial regulators. And that was a huge red flag for me to learn that. And I'm not calling them bad actors. I'm just calling them maybe the usual actors.
Yeah, it's like any other business.
Yeah,
I don't know why anyone would look at this industry and think that it's not going to operate in business practices that have been in function for over 200 years. It's not going to change. The difference is that the model has changed, and the potential for decentralization is real. Decentralization is, I do believe, is the future of where we're going to see this industry go. The problem, I think, though, is because of the powers that be, whether you look at legislative powers, financial powers within some of the strongest companies and VCs in the world, there's a real opportunity here for that to get thwarted. And I do believe that we're in a position right now with Bitcoin. Interestingly enough, Bitcoin is an ironic, and I still theorize that I think Satoshi might actually still be around. So that's my another hypothetical belief that there
that's
may be
a whole other
some
show, Paul.
Believe that there's something going on there.
It is interesting how elusive the creation
or the
is.
cypherpunks, right? They're
which
still
gets
around.
me. Yeah, this is. Boy, I wish I could just go free on this. But anyway, there's a lot of things happening.
We might have to sidebar, Paul. We might have to sidebar on that one because I'm right with you. It's a dicey discussion at the very least. For sure.
Well, let me ask this though: when we talk about the regulatory landscape, what does an optimal setup look like, and what people who want to see this field expand, because decentralization is so significant and will change so many industries, what can people do to kind of push it or nudge it in the right direction?
So my theory is pretty straightforward. I'm not necessarily a believer in big government. I do believe that we are in a situation right now where the United States has another gift on the doorstep sitting in front of them that could, be recognized as one of the most innovative applications ever in the history of man, just where decentralized blockchain could go. So I hope that, and with little faith, but I do hope that we're going to see a major renovation. Just I don't really have a dog in the hunt in terms of which party wins. What I'm more interested in is, from a societal standpoint, is that we have lawmakers and regulators that at least understand what this technology means. And there's a handful of them out there that I feel, and I've talked to several senators and congressmen. Tom Emmer's is a good example. I've had him on my show. I've listened and I've talked to Pat Toomey, and I've talked to Kristen Gillibrand. So we've had these conversations before of what they're trying to do. I get the politicians speak, and I've had a chance to sit on lobbyist committees before with different industries, and I know what I'm up against when I talk to a senator or congressman. They're saying the right things. They really are. The ones that act or maybe even know what's happening, they're starting to say the right things. That actually worries me a little bit, because if they start to say the right things and they do understand what's happening, the next big move is going to be a handout, their handout, meaning we're going to see, again, special interest groups and areas within government that have been acting in these parameters for decades on end to move back into a position to possibly bring blockchain into that realm. And if that happens here in the United States, that's a concern, because it does open up the opportunity really for the first time, because we didn't have this chance to do this in the era of what we saw with the birth of the internet, because Silicon Valley had such a stranglehold on the developer community and the finance community. That was why Silicon Valley and the power of the United States grew as it has in the past 30 years is because we controlled the parameters. Bitcoin is not a controlled parameter. Decentralization is not a controlled parameter. This scares a lot of politicians because they maybe, when they really do wake up and the light bulb comes on, they realize what that is. And my concern is that I think we'll see possibly emerging markets actually be the ones that break out into real opportunistic venues of where the future will go, which could put the nation states in the G20s and the G7 really at odds with what's happening, because we could see a diversion. This is in geopolitics that we get into, but I think we could see a diversion occurring. Right now, it's a fly on the buttock of an elephant today, but one day it will be a cheetah. And once it gets to that level, agile enough to move, quick enough to attack, and capable enough to destroy, that creates a different dynamic in the political arena. And I think that's when we may see real regulation done in a manner in which it would be beneficial for the world. But I don't necessarily think it's going to happen in the United States, unfortunately.
Yeah. I couldn't agree with you more in the sentiment of, there is something special right at the foot of the U.S. We are we are active in the space, but I think and some regulation, in my eyes at least, is good. I mean,
totally agree with that.
If there was no regulations on NASDAQ or any other major exchanges, it would be literally World War III, 4, 5, and 6. But I think, to your point, you have to abandon the idea of absolute control and do as I say, not as I do, which is 99.9% of all governments or nations right now. And you have to kind of adopt the mindset of, you know what? Get involved, understand, and create worlds that people want to come to.
Totally.
And that's something that's missing in every industry, from marketing, advertising, finance, everything. And it's a mind shift that people have to make. And it's not some kind of, voodoo, hippy dippy thing. It's real. It's a mind shift that it's an advanced mind shift. And not everyone will get it. Yeah. But we need the right people to get it.
Yeah. And if you look at the emerging markets, the reason that they're doing this is out of necessity, and innovation is what breeds inside those kinds of environments where they have to do something. There's no other option. When you're in the US, or even to a certain extent in parts of the UK and parts of Europe, there isn't a necessity there yet to have to make those kinds of concessions. So I think it still is, when people ask me, because I sometimes I will sound as if I'm more doomsdayish, and I don't want to be that way. What I'm trying to say is let's really talk about reality here. Put all the blinders away. Stop giving me the double speak. Let's talk reality here, what we know and what we've seen through history. And if we just follow those guidelines, a lot of times, and it's the problem that I think, when I get a chance to talk to regulators, a lot of times I don't think they like me calling them out for not only where we are in government, but also where we're going. So the advantage is, like to your point, what you're saying, Rich, is it is a great opportunity. It's one I think that the world is not necessarily ready for just yet, but it's coming. And I think because of the generational dispute around governments in general, and the generational computational power that's getting ready to come onto the scene, we're going to see some changes. And now we have the tools that we maybe did not have in the 80s, didn't have in the 90s, and barely had in the 2000s. What we have now is a set of tools that, literally could change mankind. So this is a big step that we're getting ready to take into.
Absolutely. And we often talk about the idea, to your point, it can change mankind. It can change the way society actually thinks. It has that power of truth, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, Michael Saylor, I think, and you've had him on your show, which I'd love to have a few minutes with him myself, and certainly Matt. You know, his approach, and even, you know, Robert Breedlove, for the most part, they're historians. And they predicate their whole platform is predicated on not understanding history and not repeating it. And that's what we just need to stop doing. That we keep shooting ourselves in the foot, generation after generation after generation. So yeah, it's interesting, and the power that this has. I don't think people really understand how prolific it is.
It's going to be a big one.
Yeah.
What do you think of Paul? This is the other. I would say regulation is a big thing, and in a sense, blockchain's biggest threat is its own effectiveness. But then also on the cybersecurity side, I think that's the other really big obstacle when we look at mass adoption. What are your thoughts? What are the trends that you've been observing on that front? You know, we can't see the kind of growth we want to see with the kind of hacks we've witnessed.
Because the blockchain is so open, it is and can fall prey to advanced actors in, you know, the scenario of real hacks being done. The difference, I think, is we're right now we're in an arms race, and what I'm saying by that is there's a set of actors out there that whether you look at whether they're in China or in Southeast Asia or possibly in the Eastern Bloc countries, they're playing right now with tool sets that are really Stone Age in comparison to what they need. The development, I think, is going to come around AI around not only the evolutional opportunity we have with AI computational capabilities, but whether or not we truly see quantum computing become real and to a full, fruitful use case. I think those are that's the race that is happening right now. What I mean by that is there's a set of people that have the capability of doing some of these major hacks, whether you look at the Ronin hack or you look at some of the things that we've seen around a lot of these blockchains that have been exposed. But at the same time, there's the white hat guys. And the white hat guys are a little bit more competent in terms of their capability because they're driving the ship. So I think they have the capability to fend this off for a while. But at some point, we will have to have some sort of cybersecurity layer on blockchain that eventually gets it into where it becomes true privacy. And I think that is a scenario that we will see play out. That technology doesn't exist today, even though there's a few companies I know, and I've talked to some CEOs and some partners that are working on it. But I think that will be the big step, and it will be the big step that's required for major banks and major regulatory financial institutions, regulated financial institutions to take that step. Outside of what we see with the traditional surface stuff, granted, still banks get hacked more than anything in the world. The amount of financial fraud that's going on it's unbelievably large. Anything that's happening in Bitcoin dwarfs that. Or crypto in general. But when crypto gets to a $10 trillion market cap as a whole, or we get to a $20 trillion market cap and we supersede what's happening in gold, now we have an issue. And I think at that point, security will be one of the most paramount. In fact, I'm looking for some of the blockchain security companies, whether we see flower blocks in some of the scenarios that may play out in those types of development circles. I'm looking for that company because there's going to be a handful of those guys that come in and become rock stars in this space for the future.
You are spot on, Paul. We are talking to a couple of cybersecurity companies that are traditionally made the leap years ago from 2.0 to 3.0.
Yep.
And to me, much like yourself, I was like, this is a no-brainer. Whether it's an investment or a partnership,
for sure, it's
a no-brainer. And we're seeing, like you said, there's not tons of them like they are now with on every desktop. But the handful that we've seen are focusing on both enterprise and personal Web3 security,
Yeah.
which is really interesting. Now they're not just doing enterprise; they're going into people's personal, protecting personal data, not just finances, but data as well. Cybersecurity, we're seeing a lot of it happen. And to your point, Paul, I think this is like an industry that is about to blow up.
Yeah. Well, it'll be a necessity, just from a regulated standpoint, especially I think as we start to see mainstream adoption occur, the amount of consumers that will come into the space that are kind of, old school in terms of thinking, even to the extent of whether you look at family offices, private equity, any of those kinds of moves, security will be a big part of this, and staying out of networks that have any kind of remote hack potential is going to be huge, which is going to lean back into what's happening with Bitcoin and some of the major projects that are out there right now that they can invest in for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
I assume a lot of the major institutional players are kind of waiting on the sideline a bit until we see a little more cybersecurity. Am I right on that?
The ones that I talk with right now, obviously the public-facing voice that comes out of these investors is still talking very cautiously. There are quite a few, though, that are placing their bets, especially in the current market conditions, as they continue to press down. We'll probably see some further tolerance to where this market's going to go, without giving any price predictions, but most likely we'll see some more downside. But I've been surprised at their lack of concern around security, because that's usually one of the first things that comes up. Even though security is still one of the big markers, I think that from a retail standpoint, if you talk to anybody on the street, even my wife, who's a very educated person, she's often questioned security around everything, whether it's banking, traditional banking, finance, securities accounts, etc. But when you get into blockchain, trying to explain the layer in which security occurs, even if you're just doing your own, self-custody, to me, that's probably the ultimate in security, even though that can be, challenged at certain levels. But I think if you're somewhat smart about it, but it's a layer that you have to leap to that typically maybe 1 in 100 people would do, which is not a scenario where you're going to see mass adoption. So to answer your question, it's less. There's much less concern there than I anticipated there would be. Now, granted, they may be looking at it with their own IT people and saying, listen, there's not really enough at risk here. We're more at risk right now within the traditional systems than we are here, at least today. But when this thing starts to move, we get to 4 trillion, we get to 8 trillion, we get to 10 trillion. All right, there's going to be some new players in the game in terms of challenging the secure layers of what blockchain will be. At that time, I think they're also probably looking at the landscape and saying there's really not a lot of options here, guys. We can only do so much institutional security. There's only a handful of companies that are even really operating at what I would say is competent levels. We're going to have the Fireblock CEOs on and really grill them on where this is going. But I think they are probably one of the few entities that have really started to spread the gap there. So it's still very early, and with any early market, it's pre-adoption. So the security, think about the web. We didn't have SSL for, 8 years after. Everybody was just free and, just running around like it was just, everything's cool. But, so it's
everything's
similar
secure.
adoption.
Yeah. It's interesting because we work with a lot of protocols, and now we're starting to kind of really form some nice partnerships with cybersecurity companies. Mm-hmm. And now I'm trying to connect the dots between protocol layer 1, layer 2 protocols, and cybersecurity. And I'm asking questions of both parties. And to your point, I was actually surprised at how little that's going on. Yeah. And this is the mistake I made mentally was, well, it's blockchain. it solves all problems. Not
It's already
really
totally secure.
Yeah, it's already totally secure via cryptography. It is a popular misconception, but to your point, there are all sorts of backdoors that could happen. It's tougher to get through. You have to be a lot slicker these days to do it. But I'm surprised, and if I'm surprised at this level, and protocols at that level are kind of like, yeah, we need to step up our game. That's a little concerning, but also a sign of where things are going to go. Like,
the Ronin Hack is a good model, and I've talked to Alexander about this at length. When you look at how Sky Mavis really addressed this, the first step was the fact that they saw it coming. So that to me is already like 80% of the way to get to a security layer that works, is when you can start to see the math and start to really see how the attacks are occurring. Much like a DNS attack, but it doesn't have the kind of scenarios. I don't know if you guys really took a look at the Ronin Hack. We covered this on the show in depth about it, and it was a spider chart showing where it occurred, how quickly they were trying to move the tokens into certain wallets, and then they were using wallet propagation to move the tokens out of there and then essentially take them into the sea. And essentially you have a money laundering engine. Right. So when I look at that, but the fact that they were capable of even knowing that that was occurring, to me was, wow, this is going to be achievable. This is not like what we're seeing even still today when you think about money laundering and just the amount that's happening in the regular fiat system. It's a lot of people don't realize how much money is laundered through the fiat system right now. And I think that is in itself going to see some very good opportunistic things. But if there's one thing that I'm concerned about within this, is when AI gets involved. When someone is capable of training an AI system to propagate wallets at the speed of light, I mean, literally just, millions of wallets per second, millions. Yeah. When we get to that level and then create decision trees that are built into that AI methodology to move money around, this could get really unusual. And at that point, it's completely untraceable, which is, I think, a lot of the cyber guys that I've talked to at high levels in government. I talked to an NSA guy who talks about this all the time. And they're actually concerned that when we see AI enter into blockchain at the levels they think that could happen, and it's still probably maybe a decade away, but literally it would be unstoppable. In the sense of being able to move, given the right actors at play. So security in the next decade, critical for the future of how this works. It is like number one on the totem pole for sure.
Yeah, and from the AI standpoint, you'll have autonomous hacking networks. Mm-hmm. Basically, you set them free, and they make their own decisions. And it's now at the speed of the network, and it's lightning. It's not like a manual, drag and dump kind of thing. It's now happening autonomously.
Yeah, it's kind of like Twitter. Twitter is, I'd say, 60, maybe 70% bots, and that won't be for long now that Elon's got the keys. But I think eventually that will start to change a lot of other dynamics. That, and also that hash rate, so to speak, is going to have to go somewhere. Yeah. Those farms are going to have to go somewhere. I fear they may find their way to blockchain.
Yeah, absolutely.
Paul, as we sort of wrap up, I want to ask you just one last question. And we do this with all of our guests. Usually we try to get some key takeaways. And I think from our side, what do you see as most significant for businesses looking to get into this space? What should they be keeping an eye on? And I guess, we've talked about a lot of the challenges, but what is your biggest optimism for blockchain, crypto, AI in the next 10 years? That's a big question and maybe hard to condense, but as much as possible.
Actually, I think it boils down to a very systematic process for any company at any level to make a decision to to do something in blockchain. And it could be anything. It could be, creating some sort of NFT utility within your own business model. It could be just utilizing, crypto as a payment method, as something as simple as that. But I think for most companies, and I consult a lot with companies right now around how to adapt. And the one thing that I always ask the team when my first meeting with them is I want you to first understand, forget about understanding blockchain, just what we're at this state because you kind of know a little bit about where this is going. But I think the key is going to be every company has to make a decision on how this is going, whatever it might be around blockchain that they're interested in, how it is going to make a major shift in their business, and not just saying, hey, I want to do it because it's cool. I wanted a Twitter account because I think people are going to follow me back in 2007. I was going to launch a Facebook page and start paying for likes. The social media model is not where we're going with blockchain. Blockchain, I think, these are going to be real utility use cases that big business are going to figure out of how to integrate. So that's the first question. I want you to start developing on blockchain in the essence of just experimenting, but I want you to be thinking about the big picture. Starbucks is a good example. They understood where this needed to go, which was their largest mobile, I would say to an extent, one of their largest successes, their mobile audience, what they've been able to do with digital payments in their app. So it was a natural for them to understand that blockchain could be an amazing tool for CRM and loyalty. And that's how they're going to use it. So they've made that decision. Chipotle is going to go a little bit different. They went the payment route with Flexa. There's a lot of companies that are starting to move in this direction. But I think a lot of companies are running into the wall right now. How do we even use it? And that's the first question that has to be answered, even if it is just not the ultimate of what it's going to be done, but at least the one step in the right direction. If they're just getting into it because it's cool, because we need to say that we have an NFT, because we need to say that we accept crypto payments, then they've already kind of lost the vision of where this is heading.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Just get involved, whether it be knowledge-wise or actually developing, and have purpose doing it
for sure,
and have an opinion.
Yeah.
And Paul, just for people who don't already listen, I think a lot of our listeners probably do, but where can they find you? Where can they keep up to date?
So the YouTube channel is just Paul Barron Network, and you can find our 2 podcasts on any of the podcast spots out there. It's Tech Path Crypto and then Metaverse Insider are the 2 podcasts that we currently host. We're getting ready to launch a third, but also just paulbarronnetwork.com. Any of that is going to get you into our media engine.
We'll be sure to include those links as well. Paul, thank you so much. Oh, Rich, go ahead.
Yeah. No, we're just saying to the audiences, check him out. He has some really, really interesting podcasts and points of view. So dig in.
Absolutely. And Paul, thanks again. Yeah,
it's been good. Thanks, guys.
Cheers.